Afternoon. Welcome once again to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our premier digital platform featuring a variety of programs to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where you need it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, the Deputy Director of Events here at NCIA, and I'm very excited to welcome you all to the second edition of our brand new Catalyst Conversation series this afternoon. If you're just joining us, please stay on the lookout for some housekeeping instructions to be relayed via the chat window, so we're not taking up any more valuable time with routine info. But if you have any questions throughout for our team on how to participate in this virtual event, don't hesitate to message either myself, Brian Gilbert, or my colleague, Brooke Gilbert, at any time via the chat window. So what are we waiting for? Let's get this show on the road. In today's Catalyst Conversations, featuring some of the smartest minds in cannabis research and analytics, panelists will be sharing their insights on the U.S. and global cannabis markets and how cannabis businesses can use data to their advantage, specifically geared towards social equity applicants across the United States. We've got an all-star panel assembled that will surely be a groundbreaking conversation, so I don't want to take the mic for any longer than needed. So thank you to our audience, and special shout out to all the NCIA members in the room for joining us this afternoon. And with that, please enjoy today's session entitled Catalyst Conversations, the data you need to win, being co-moderated by the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager, as well as the host of NCIA's Cannabis Diversity Minute, Tahir Johnson, alongside Mike Lamuto, the co-founder of Boost and the committee organizer for NCIA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. You two have the virtual stage, Tahir and Mike, so welcome to the Catalyst Conversations. You can kick it off from here.
Thank you, Brian. I definitely appreciate that great introduction, and I'm happy to have this esteemed panel with such great, intelligent speakers to help educate us with everything we know, everything they know about the U.S. cannabis market. And happy to have my man Mike Lamuto as my co-host. So for those out there listening, if you don't know, the global cannabis market is projected to hit $42.7 billion by 2024. We have a few states with measures on the ballot that could potentially legalize, bring in $9 billion in additional revenue to the cannabis market. And that would bring the U.S. cannabis market alone to $35.1 billion by 2025. We have a community here with our social equity scholarship program where we've given out almost 100 complimentary memberships to NCIA. So we want to make sure that that community is armed with the best data and information. So today we're going to talk about some of the things like how can cannabis business owners respond to the massive changes in consumer purchasing behavior due to COVID. We're going to talk a little bit about the disparity of ownership and arrest between ethnic groups. And we're also going to talk about some of the emerging opportunities in the cannabis industry. So I'm very happy to have this panel. To introduce our guests, first up, I have John Kagia from New Frontier Data. I have David Abernathy from ArcView. I have Jocelyn Sheltraw from Headset, Maya Jasmine from BDSA. And we're very happy to have you. Thanks again to all of our panelists. Mike, do you have anything you want to add before we jump in?
I just want to say that I really appreciate being able to have these folks on here today. They're really some of the leaders in the industry, and really data is what is driving a lot of things. And I was at a conference a couple of years ago, and there was a panel about data, and it was just like, look, like data is the thing that matters more than anything else, and we kind of often don't really pay attention to it. So having these folks here to talk about this today, I think is really crucial at this point in time.
Absolutely. And so just to get started for the folks out there watching, could each of you guys introduce yourself, tell us something about yourself and what your company does specifically and how you ended up in cannabis and data? Let's see. David, do you maybe want to start for us? I see you first on our screen.
Sure. I'm David Abernathy. I'm Vice President of Research and Consulting at the ArcView Group. I got into cannabis in 2009, looking for something new to do and something that I could be passionate about. And cannabis, medical cannabis, was really just starting to take off in California. The ArcView Group started in 2010 on the premise that business is one of the most powerful platforms for social change. So the first thing that ArcView launched was an investor network to connect cannabis companies that are raising capital with investors that are looking to invest in the space. And we still do that today. But in 2013, we also launched ArcView Market Research, our research division, where we really published the first reports about the legal cannabis space. Over the years, we've collaborated with both New Frontier Data and BDS Analytics, and published dozens of reports on the industry. And most recently, about a year and a half ago, we started getting into some consulting when some really big companies started reaching out to us and asking for help navigating the space, understanding the dynamics, building and validating strategies. So really, we decided earlier this year to jump in with both feet, and I've been spending a lot of time building out that consulting division.
Awesome. Well, we're definitely glad to have you. And I know ArcView brings a lot of expertise to the table. Next up, I see Jocelyn. Could you introduce yourself and tell us, about your background, how you got in cannabis, and a little bit more about Headset?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I'm about 2.5 years into the cannabis industry, and I've been with Headset this entire time. I spent my background working in ad tech, and I was working with mobile app developers the year the iPhone came out. And sort of like David, I wanted to try something new and have really be, I guess, living and working my passions. But at the time, when I started working in the cannabis industry, or before working in the cannabis industry, I think I wasn't really living in accordance with my authentic self. And so what happened is I started working in the cannabis industry. I started to use cannabis in a different way. I started to use it to come into greater levels of consciousness. And that sort of opened up my world, and realizing how insular my world was prior. I'd grown up in Orange County. I'd been living in San Francisco, working in tech. I had a very narrow view of the world. And then I came into cannabis. I started using it in a different way. I started to become very passionate about what we're doing at Headset. But then more importantly, my community opened up, and I started making all these new friends from all different backgrounds that I hadn't ever had access to before. And so for me, it really opened up my whole world, my mindset, and realizing, that the possibilities of cannabis outside of just how we all kind of think about it today. So I've become really integrated in the community in many different ways, from either an equity perspective, working with associations that are fighting for cannabis policy, and also through this journey. I'm a quarter Paiute. We're Kutsadaka Paiutes, and we're one of the only California recognized tribes that's not federally recognized. So we're in process of going through that right now, and we actually have a bill in with Congress to be able to have us recognized, and so we're hoping that happens. So for me, a lot of my passion, when I give the story of my background, it's really about this realization of waking up to who I am and what I want to put into this, earth, or this existence that we're in. And so it just happens, though, that I'm very interested in people, and I'm very interested in living in accordance with my true self. And that's why I'm really involved in the community, because I don't know, these are apparently things I care about, and I'm just living in accordance with that. So with Headset, we've been around for 6 years at this point, and it's interesting because it's really connected into my personal beliefs of, I guess I'll say, just truth, is providing as much truth as possible. And so it's really interesting to be able to work for a data company and work in this industry when, we're just kind of trying to help facilitate that truth for cannabis operators. So what we do is, we provide software for different parts of the supply chain, software for the retailer, software for the brand, and then software for all cannabis operators to understand what's happening in real time. So yeah, it's a little bit about me.
No, and thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad you gave that perspective. And that's part of why I asked about you guys' background, because I think it's important to inspire other people, especially women and people of color, to pursue opportunities in cannabis. So you sharing that, really meant a lot. And on that note, I'll go down to my girl, Maya Jasmine, down there in New Orleans. Tell us about you, how you got into the cannabis industry, what you guys do at BDSA.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I am Maya. I am a senior analyst and director of research for industry intelligence at BDSA. And I got into this space because I was in market research, and I have been since 2005. And, it became kind of mundane. I was in the consumer electronics space, and cannabis presented itself as an opportunity. And if you're an analyst, to get in at the ground level of an industry is really not an opportunity that comes along every 10 minutes. So I jumped at it and been going full force ever since. And I really think it is paramount for us to make sure, since we're in, the infancy of legal cannabis, to make it as equitable as possible. We have the power to do it. We have the stage to do it. And so we can make this industry look like all other industries should look like. And that's really the passion behind me working in cannabis. And I just love data. So that part just gels well and marries well. And at BDSA, what we do is similar to what the other companies here do. We have several products, all data products, consumer insights, we have retail tracking, we have industry intelligence, we partner with IRI on some products. We produce reports, and we just we want to approach data from a holistic view. So you look at consumer, you look at retailers, you look at cultivators, and you understand the numbers, but you dig deeper and you want to get the story out of the numbers. So insights is our business. So we like to say we data deeper. And it's really just digging what those numbers numbers or whatever the data is telling you about your business or your interest in the industry.
Absolutely, and I know it's important, and I know it's great for you to be able to tie that love of people and data together. And speaking of that, seeing this brother here speak, John Kagia, was one of the first people that introduced me to how important data is. Even before I got to NCI, I've had the opportunity to see him speak in NCI, and the opportunity is for cannabis and why data is so important. So John, it's a pleasure to have you here on this panel, and could you tell the people a little bit about you and what New Frontier does?
Thank you, Tahir, and thank you to NCIA for putting this conversation together. It's actually too rare that we get a chance to, as the data heads in the space, get a chance to do this. So delighted to hear the backgrounds of everyone and really looking forward to this conversation. John Kagia, I'm the Chief Knowledge Officer with New Frontier Data. And for those of you who don't know us, New Frontier Data is a research data and analytics firm focused exclusively on the cannabis industry. A lot of analog between what we do and what Headset, ArcView, and BDS do, which is we're trying to deliver insights into the size, growth, and evolution of this industry. When I joined the company about 6 years ago now, which feels like it was yesterday and also like it was a lifetime ago, it was clear that there just wasn't the type of data-driven decision-making, data-driven insights that we were used to in our work outside of the cannabis sector. So my background is in research. I've been an analyst my entire career. And it had the privilege over the course of my career in working in a range of sectors. Did some work with government agencies, everything from Department of State to Department of Defense. Used to do some work in the financial services sector, worked with associations and nonprofits. And across all of these entities that we served, across all of these groups that we worked with, generally it was always that we were working with senior decision makers to provide them research that would help them make mission critical decisions. So whether that's helping IBM figure out their global health practice, helping Microsoft figure out a strategy for the next generation of classroom technology, helping a defense contractor build the next generation armored personnel carrier. These were all really major decisions for the organizations, and they really embraced the role that market insights would play in shaping their ultimate strategies. And given how nascent cannabis was, we just weren't seeing that happening in the space. And I thought, to Maya's point, as a information junkie, somebody who really loved seeing the emergence of this industry, and candidly, prior to about 2011, I never thought adult use cannabis was going to be legal in my lifetime. to see the way this wave rolled across the US, I was like, this is just unbelievable. Now, trying to talk to people in DC at the time about legal cannabis, you know, guys would grab the kids and run for the head. But it was such a compelling opportunity. And you know, I talk about my life transitioning from black and white to technicolor, just the transition, to Jocelyn's point about realizing what passion means. You know, I always enjoyed my work prior to this, but there's something clarifying about coming to cannabis that has made it both the hardest I have ever worked, but also the most rewarding work I've ever done. And the opportunity to help provide the sort of market insights that help the people who are the vanguard of this industry, the most sophisticated players, make better informed decisions. The new entrants understand the space that they're coming into, and learn the lessons of everyone who's done this in the past, so that the foundation of the industry is built better moving forward, has been a phenomenal privilege of my career.
Awesome. Thank you, John. And thank you, everybody. It's always great to hear everybody's stories of how they got in the industry and why they're here. I think that's one of the things that really makes cannabis really unique, I think, is the amount of passion. I saw Brian's hashtag there, passion for the plant. Right? We're also passionate about this. So, you know, before we really get into the details of like some of the trends that we're seeing, which we'll definitely get to today, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the access to data, because when we're talking with social equity applicants and operators, a lot of the conversation comes to access, whether it's access to capital, access to resources, access to applications and licenses. Access is a big kind of catchword that we're constantly facing. And data is no different. A lot of times people think that maybe you have to have big money to get big data. And I know from experience and talking with Tahir, you know, we were commiserating over this, is that, you know, it's not actually always true. So could one of you guys speak to maybe, you know, some of the ways that you can actually access data that doesn't cost, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars?
Sure.
Sure, I can jump in for a little while at least.
Sure.
So you access data for the cannabis industry the same way you do any other industry, right? You jump on Google and you start to look for what you need. I think the misconception is that you have to find specific cannabis data, right? But general population data, consumption, or, you know, like from SAMHSA, government data about GDP, zip code data, all of that matters. All of that feeds into our analysis, like professional analysis of what we do, because you get to gauge a market, right? So you, to get to size of industry, everything matters, not just the cannabis part of it. And there is cannabis specific data that is free and not behind a paywall. New Frontier puts out white papers, reports all of the time on not just US data, but global data. We put out white papers and report BDSA. Headset does as well. There are webinars. You can call into, sometimes there are analysts, phone calls that you can call into. Anything that you can get your hands on, you know, you can glean and sift through and you can get insights from. And you don't have to think that it's behind a $10,000 wall for it to be applicable to your needs and actionable. And it's just what you can gather and what you can get from it and work with is the important part of it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maya. Absolutely. David, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, all of the companies here put out a lot of really great free information, and all of the companies here put out really good information. Be careful though, that's not always true. There are a lot of folks that are publishing data and information about the cannabis industry, and not all of them are putting together well-validated, well-researched numbers. So there's a lot of sort of wild, crazy numbers that aren't based on reality floating around out there. So make sure that you're understanding sort of the reputation and credibility of the source that you're getting the data from. And to Maya's point, there's a whole bunch of data that we don't tend to think about when we think about cannabis data. If you're starting a dispensary and you've identified a potential location to open up shop, one of the really critical pieces of data that you might want to gather is the foot traffic. So you might go and spend a few hours on some different days of the week standing at that location and counting the number of people that go by or the number of cars that drive by. That's a really great set of data points. So don't be afraid to collect your own data. Once you start operating your business, whatever your business is, you're going to start generating data, and that data can be useful, sometimes even more useful than sort of the general data that's out there. And I'm sure we'll talk more about what kinds of data that get generated and how to use that. But certainly take a very broad look at what data is.
Awesome. Thank you, David. And John, yeah, sorry, go ahead. Maybe you're going to talk about what I was about to ask you.
I was actually just going to maybe a quick riff on what David has just said, which is maybe just kind of taking a step back and demystifying the term data. So, anything that helps refine your perspective, anything that helps you think more deeply about the issue that you're dealing with is data. So I know it can be a little scary, particularly for those who aren't coming in with this kind of data quantitative spreadsheet, Excel orientation. It can be a little daunting to be kind of having this conversation around data, thinking that it has to be that, but it doesn't. So think expansively about the information that whether those are conversations, whether those are a number that you've seen written in a newspaper article. Really, all of that is data, and it doesn't have to be in kind of this conventionally described data lake, data warehouse, big data architecture for it to be invaluable. And then just a quick point, second, around trust but verify, or maybe verify before you trust. I remember one of the things that convinced me that there was an opportunity in this market is one of the first numbers I saw from a non-ArcView source early on when I was looking at this in 2011, 2012, was somebody claiming that the cannabis industry is going to be, the legal cannabis industry is going to be $100 billion in the next 5 years. And I was like, there's no way that is possible. Like, I know Americans consume a lot of cannabis, but there's no way that number is right. It got massive amount of traction, and that to me just affirmed that, all right, so one, there's an opportunity here for better data. I don't know anything about everything about cannabis yet. I hardly knew anything at the time, but I was like, I'm sure this number is wrong. And it really validated that, in an environment where things are moving so quickly, there's a lot of people who will be throwing their hats in the ring, who will be pulling things out of thin air or darker places to just to make a splash. And I think really important that as you see these numbers pop, the bigger number is not always the best number. You don't necessarily want to lean in on things that just don't pass the sniff test, because particularly when you're pitching investors or trying to engage other stakeholders, people have a good bead now of where this market is going, and coming in with these outlandish numbers that just don't pass the sniff test, I think actually hurts you in the long term.
Right, and that's a good point, John. I know that there's a lot of data out there, and it's certainly important to verify your sources. But then even once data is out there and you have access to it, Jocelyn, maybe you could talk about this. How do you take the data that you've gotten and they'll use that to help you inform your business decisions and, analyze that data?
Well, I think the first thing that you need to think about is like where you are in your business life cycle, right? So if you're in process of submitting your application or trying to get an application, you're going to need different data than once you actually have your license and you're ready to open your store. Then that's going to be about using both market data to understand what's happening in your state, also understanding what's happening within your own four walls. So it's first understanding kind of what data you're looking for. And to the point from the earlier question, you also have to learn to read between the lines. So for example, California had released the numbers that we were under our tax projections, or what the revenue was projected to be. But actually, when you start to look at the fact that operators have 6 months to pay their taxes, that's just the money that was collected. So that's not actually the reality. The cannabis industry, we had peak record sales in California in August and again in September. So you really have to learn to read between the lines with the data. And this is posted on notable, publishers that are releasing this. So I think you have to learn to think really critically about what kind of data you're looking for your business. So if you're in the process of submitting your application, you want to give your investors the sense that you're credible, right? Because you need to give them that assurance that you know what you're talking about, you know the industry that you're getting into. All of these sources that are here on this call today are going to be helpful for that. New Frontier, I read every morning when you guys send out the 5 stories of the day. That is the first thing I read. I read BDSA's reports, I read ArcView's reports, all of them. You want to take in all of the data sources and then just read between the lines and what you're looking for. And then when it comes, you've got your license, or you've got, you're ready to open your store, then you really want to understand, okay, I have a good sense of what's happening in the market right now, but my region, my community is going to be very different than what I'm seeing in the state. So what kind of questions can I ask myself to understand how maybe my category spread is going to look different than California or whatever state you're in, right? So then it's just reading between the lines and then using all these different sources to come to whatever answer you're looking for.
Right, and with that being said, as people are looking to like expand into new markets, especially since we have a number of social equity operators, and social equity is typically like the last part to come to market, what are some things that people can do to like prepare for that expansion in advance, or to try to give themselves a leg up, if anybody has an answer for that?
So I'll say, I think it's very important to know your regulatory, whatever market you're moving into, you need to know the regulatory environment in that market, because it, like Jocelyn said, it differs, and it will affect how you operate your business in whatever market you're moving into. And to everybody's point that talked before, like there is just as much benefit in qualitative data as there is in quantitative data. And so taking the two, marrying the two, applying them to your strategy is the most important part about using it.
And also understanding the supply chain, understanding the supply chain is so important, because this is when we see differences and trends in states. One of the things I think that often isn't talked about is like, what are the challenges of the supply chain? So for example, in California, we've seen decreases in the vape market share. But a lot of that, it's not necessarily just because consumers are shifting their interest or their buying habits. That could be because of the supply chain. It's very hard right now during COVID to get hardware from China. And so understanding how this changes in every state is going to be very important. So again, using critical thinking to really dig deep, use your network and people that you know that are working in different parts of the supply chain and ask them what they're seeing. Because this is data that you're not going to get from any of our reports. You got to really dig deep, know your community, and understand what's happening within their region. The fires right now, right? At all West Coast is going to be affected by the fires. We're going to see supply shortages and, potentially in flour, and there's going to be issues in extraction. So you got to understand what's happening, because we've had 3 crises over the last year in the cannabis industry. So those are certainly going to impact your business.
Right,
Yeah,
and that actually makes me want to think of a question that I saw, and I'm pulling this from the Q&A. Someone asked, like, how do you go about, calculating your numbers if the traditional market isn't included? I know in California, that's a huge part of the market. So as you guys are doing, like putting out data nationally, or even talking about California, how do you all make those considerations?
So I suppose I can take a swag at that. The first thing we learned coming into cannabis is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I've in every other sector that I worked in, the issue was that we had too much data. Like, you're literally drowning in the amount of data that you have access to. And then we came into cannabis, and really basic questions about the market, about the consumer, about the operators were early on virtually impossible to get. So if you weren't going to have access to these kind of really robust established systems, the question became, how can you use the little nuggets that are available to at least get a direction on what this new market that you're looking at? And this is actually really important to think about for people who are applying into new markets where there isn't an existing kind of comparator. So the first question is, what can you learn from the existing markets that you can apply as lessons to the market that you're analyzing? So, for example, Colorado does a pretty good job reporting out its market performance, state revenues, sales and tax revenues, volumes of products sold, better than most markets. It is not a perfect analog for California, but if you take the Colorado data and just model it out to the scale of California, it starts giving you a sense of what the potential opportunity could look like. It's not a perfect analog, but it's one way to think about, all right, so this is potentially how big it could get. And then now look at the California context specifically and look for differences between the way California is running the market, like Jocelyn said, and the way Colorado is. And what things do you then discount for? You know, do you make adjustments for the fact that California's tax rate is much higher than it is for Colorado, which might make people less inclined to shop? So maybe you shave 10, 15% off for that. Do you account for the fact that there's still a lot of sections of California where, because of local autonomy rules, cannabis businesses are not allowed to operate? So you have the major urban centers that cannabis retail is operational, but there's still large swaths of the state where legal cannabis is not accessible. So do you discount, you know, to think about how much you need to discount the population access issue in California relative to the full market potential? These are the sorts of ways you can adapt data from a really good market that's doing the reporting to a market where the information is more opaque or more difficult to come by. It may not be decimal precise, and to be clear, we are still working toward getting decimal precise in this industry. But it gives you a good indication of where this market is going. And then keep revisiting it. So one of the things I think all of our companies do really well is iterate and reiterate. So we keep building upon the lessons that we've learned to refine our approaches. And I think it's really important to understand that these numbers are not static. You will notice that all of our estimates, all of our models continue to evolve because we're getting better at it. We're getting better data, we're building better models. And so once you have kind of a general framework, keep coming back to it as more data accumulates. Colorado now has 6 years of data. When we were first trying to build Colorado's model 5 years ago, you know, it's a lot hairier than it is now because the trend lines are much clearer. So, you know, learn from the markets that exist, apply those models to the markets that don't yet, and then make adjustments based on what you know, study the regulations and think deeply about how it might impact. And then look at what the analysts are saying about how the markets might perform. And I think that gives you a really robust framework, even in an environment of imperfect information, to make a pretty good, to gain pretty good insight into how a market might perform.
Awesome. And also don't discredit comparable industries. So people don't like to, well, they think that there aren't any because of cannabis history and how people look at it. But there's the wine industry, there's the bev alcohol industry, there's tobacco. You can look at trends across comparable industries to help paint your picture of what will happen in the future for cannabis as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Maya, for bringing up the alcohol and beverage industry, because that's something that, you know, a lot of people are comparing a lot, especially now with the recession that's kind of we're in, or it's looming, or whatever it is that we're at. You know, David, this is a question for you, especially with ArcView, you know, and you guys, you know, being connected with capital, and capital tends to, you know, be very conscious of what's going on with recessions and stuff. What do you see happening right now with the data that we're looking at regarding the recession, and how cannabis companies can be kind of preparing for that, not only heading into the recession, but also coming out of that?
Sure. Well, there are a few issues there, right? So one issue to look at is how are cannabis sales looking in legal markets? And cannabis had an advantage that a lot of industries didn't coming into COVID, which was that in a lot of states, cannabis businesses were deemed essential services and were allowed to continue to operate, while entire other industries were being shut down for months at a time. So that's allowed cannabis to really continue to thrive in a way that many industries have not in recent months. And looking at the effects of a recession on cannabis sales, we often look at cannabis and most drugs as what's called non-elastic, meaning regardless of what the price is, people tend to buy it. One of the key pieces of information that's missing from that picture, though, especially in markets that have a robust unregulated market, is often the unregulated market is cheaper than the legal market. And this is largely the fault of regulators who create regulations that are extremely expensive to comply with, as well as taxes that are that jack up the price of cannabis, sometimes to extreme levels, like in the case of California. So while it's true that consumers are likely to buy cannabis regardless of the price, and even as sort of other parts of their personal budgets get squeezed, often if there's a cheaper choice in the unregulated market, as they have less money, they will move more in that direction. The second piece of this sort of recession question is, what are investors doing? And how easy is it to raise capital in this market? And there are sort of two competing forces happening. First of all, even prior to COVID, in 2019, cannabis markets underwent a correction where a lot of these public stocks that had valuations that had gotten a little out of control really saw huge declines, and that dried up the capital markets quite a bit. And then COVID hit, and the possibility of recession following, which all tends to have a negative effect on capital. But one thing that was interesting is seeing the way investors looked at the fact that cannabis was designated an essential service. That really gave them a lot of confidence in the industry, and the potential for the industry, and the idea that legalization initiatives would continue to move forward, and the idea that cannabis would be able to survive even these pretty big seismic shifts caused by COVID. And a lot of investors don't have the kind of options that they did. A lot of industries that they would have invested in are just not investable right now. They're not making any money. And cannabis starts to look like a really good option in comparison. So those sort of competing forces are meaning that that capital is continuing to flow into cannabis. Certainly not at the level that it was prior to the correction in 2019, but investors are still interested, and I suspect that they will continue to be increasingly interested as we move forward.
Absolutely, and I think that's one point that you made where even though the market may be changing somewhat due to COVID and just the landscape of it, we've definitely seen where cannabis has remained essential, and in a lot of places the cannabis usage has even upticked. And Johnson, I think this would be a good question for you. Could you talk a little bit about the way the consumer behaviors have changed? Like, what are you guys seeing in Headset from like a demographic and wallet share standpoint?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so first let me explain how we collect and analyze the data, because this is a really important part of how we're reporting on all these trends in real time. So what we do is we provide a software for retailers in which they use this software on top of their point of sale system, and it ingests all that point of sale data and turns it into these actionable visualizations and reports that the retailer can use essentially to manage their inventory and then understand who their customer is, what they like to purchase, where they're coming from. So we give this software to retailers to use. And what happens is then we take all that aggregated point of sale data, and we have a bunch of different methodologies that we run. So we make sure that the retailers that we have are things like in rural versus urban versus suburban areas. It's reflective of the entire state because this is all aggregated data. So we're pulling this data in via all of these point of sale systems. There's 24 point of sale systems we're connected to. Doesn't matter which one. We want to make sure the data is reflective of the entire market. So we're pulling this in real time, we're aggregating it, we're anomalizing it, meaning we're getting rid of any privacy information, and then we're essentially running this combination of AI, robots, humans, because in cannabis, we don't have UPC codes, so we have to have an entire team that goes through and tags all of these different product SKUs, and so we have standard naming conventions. So as you could imagine, just as an example, Blue Dream, when someone's putting it into the point of sale system, could be Blue Space Dream, it could be Blue Dream, one word, it could be Blue Dreams, there could be 50, 100 different naming conventions for Blue Dream. So we normalize all of this data, And then we're able to, in real time, start reporting on what's happening in each market. So right now at Headset, we're reporting, or we've turned on our Insights platform in 9 different markets. So 3 Canadian provinces, and then 6 US markets. And so what we've seen in the markets that we're reporting on, so I'm going to speak specifically to in the United States, California, Colorado, Washington, Nevada, primarily, that we did just turn on, Michigan and Massachusetts. But in general, what we see across these states is that there's been some pretty standard trends. So we've seen things like people are more concerned about their lungs, most likely. So we've seen shifts away from inhalables into things like more edible sales. We saw declines in pre-rolls at the start of COVID. What was interesting with pre-rolls is that even though there were declines in pre-rolls, we did see the little dog walkers. Those seem to be doing okay because people aren't sharing pre-rolls as much. So it makes sense. They're having their own individual. We saw things like shifts into delivery. So we had looked at, for California specifically, we were looking at what percentage of sales makes up delivery versus in-store. And so we would see things like anywhere from 5 to 20% of sales went to delivery, depending on where that retailer was based. So in more rural areas versus suburban areas, deliveries seem to be higher in suburban areas. We've seen things like less trips into a store, however, higher purchasing sizes. Makes sense. People don't want to make as many trips in. And then we've seen that with senior citizens in particular, we've seen their basket sizes increasing and also less trips going into the store. So that's been an interesting trend. And then as of recently, one of the things that really surprised me, so we were looking at different demographic groups, and we saw that Gen Z, so Gen Z is people that are born 1996 and thereafter. This group in general makes up anywhere between like 6 and I think 10% of sales across the markets that we're looking at. But what was interesting is that Gen Z, for the first time, females, Gen Z females, flower sales were not the highest percentage of sales in their basket. So when we looked at what makes up a $100 basket for Gen Z women, vapes had actually surpassed flower, which was very surprising. So it's really interesting to look at the different demographic groups and kind of what their purchasing patterns are, so that you can then either reflect that in the products that you're making or the products that you're stocking on your shelves. So those are a few of the kind of key things we've seen. Thank you,
Jocelyn. That's a lot of great insights. You know, especially the thing that always sticks out to me is the little mini pre-rolls, the dog walkers, you call them. You know, it's really interesting because who would have thought, like, right, a year or two ago, that's like one of the biggest things that's really climbing right now.
Well, and I think, Mike, that's the reason that like looking at data consistently is so important, especially during a time like COVID, because we are seeing these changes shift really quickly. Like pre-COVID, we started to see very standard trends in the cannabis industry, like you would see in a consumer packaged goods industry. There were seasonality trends, like all of this stuff started to make, our charts would look the same every single month. Now it does not. So like you have to look at data, and you got to be looking at it regularly to really keep afloat of what's happening. And then you shift your business. So the pre-roll example that I gave, like this company is a California-based company that they were doing larger pre-roll sizes, and then they pivoted because they're like, oh, okay, we see this is happening. We can make our business, we can change it really quick. And now they're one of the leading pre-roll companies here. So you can shift, you can pivot.
To that point, you know, one of the common ways that I see people using data is to support business decisions or strategies that they've already made. So you might, you know, a new company might be putting together a pitch deck, and they're looking for, you know, the potential size or growth of the market, so they can put that on a slide and convince investors that what they've already chosen to do is a good idea. And data is certainly valuable in that way, and all sorts of businesses use it, not just to support their cases, but also to validate, to make sure that their idea is good. But the sort of level 2 of using data is looking at data and letting that drive business decisions, drive strategy. And that's a more complex undertaking. But it's also one that can yield really amazing results. And one of the things that we do with consulting is help businesses really start to develop strategies that that answer those needs that are identified by digging deeply into the data. But to sort of circle back on one of the points made earlier, data can tell you what is happening. What it can't tell you on its own is why. And so it's really important when you see a trend, right? Like vape sales are increasing or decreasing. If they're decreasing, is that because people are choosing to consume less vapes, or is it to Jocelyn's point that there is a supply chain disruption and there are just fewer of them available? Because the response of your business is directly opposite depending on what is the reason for that decline in vape sales, right? If it's because fewer people are choosing to smoke vapes, maybe you want to be making or selling, stocking fewer vapes. But if the issue is that there's a supply chain disruption and not enough vapes are available, then you want to do the direct opposite. Maybe you want to make more vapes or stock more vapes. So really understanding the why of the data and using that to help inform business strategy is a really powerful tool.
Awesome. Thank you, David. I'm sorry, Maya, did you have something you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what Jocelyn and David said, you have to make sure that you build your strategy to be responsive to the data. So you can collect it and analyze it. But if you're not building your business in a way that you can respond to it, then it's kind of, it's for nothing. So you have to be able to respond to what you're seeing, whether it validates what you went in thinking, or if it's the opposite, you need to be able to adjust to it.
Right. Don't resist the data. If the data is telling you something, don't resist it. And also really look at why. I love what you said, David, and really getting into the why, because, you don't just use it to justify and say, well, that's why, because you might not actually know why just from looking at some statistics. And so that actually leads to to a question that I've been actually dying to ask John here is, I'm a little nerded out about this one, honestly. When I got the email or report or whatever it was from New Frontier recently about archetypes that they've kind of come up with here. I don't know if you guys probably don't know this, but I'm a trained acupuncturist and I specialized in archetypal acupuncture. So I'm really, really nerdy about archetypes. And I'm really interested to see how, not only how you guys came up with these archetypes, but also what's next with these archetypes, because I feel like this is just maybe the tip of the iceberg. So could you please speak to the archetypes that you guys have come up with and where you're looking to go with that?
Sure, and thank you for the question, Mike, because I think this fits really well with this broad conversation around using data to make better informed decisions. So first, just for those of you who may not know what archetyping is, basically it's the way of looking at a population and then segmenting out those population into subgroups or into segments based on commonalities. Now, one of the things that has always bothered me about the cannabis industry, and this was even before I joined the space, was this idea that first we were defining the market as a binary. You were either a cannabis consumer or you weren't. And then we began to define the market as you're either a med consumer or a rec consumer or you're a non-consumer. And to me, that just felt like a really kind of insufficient way of defining what, in my experience, was a really broad diversity of consumers who were consuming for very different reasons in very different ways, and with very different expectations for both their experience and what they were going to do after they consumed. So in 2018, we did this very large US cannabis consumer survey. We had over 4,000 respondents asking, oh my goodness, it was almost, at the longest, it was about a 25-minute survey. So really kind of dug into the guts of who they were, and not just who they were as cannabis consumers. So not just kind of asking about what they buy, what they consume, when they consume, but also asking some of these philosophical questions. How do they feel about cannabis policy, cannabis politics? How do they feel about the impact of cannabis on their own lives? Who in their social networks knows that they consume, and who do they consume with? Do they consume on their own or with other people? What products do they prefer and why? I mean, we really kind of explored their experience as a cannabis consumer. And taking all of this data, nearly 200 different data points, we threw this into this algorithmic engine to ask the engine to tell us, all right, group these groups in, group these people into groups that are most similar. And through this process, and I've dramatically simplified it, I can see my data scientist wincing at this description, but that's a really basic description of how we came up with our 9 cannabis consumer archetypes. And these archetypes really kind of now broke out the cannabis consumer into discrete, clearly defined groups that went beyond just whether they were med or rec, but included factors like what products they consume, when they consume, how often they consume, and with whom. Do they buy product or do they mooch off their friends? All of these were factors. And so just a couple of examples of the archetypes we came up with. So two worth noting, our two largest groups amongst our highest consuming groups were our traditional lifestylers and our modern lifestylers. Both groups are about the same age, median age about 34, 35. Very, very active consumers. So these are people who consume a lot and they consume for a host of reasons, sometimes to relax, sometimes to go out and seek entertainment, sometimes in social settings. But the big difference between the traditional lifestylers and modern lifestylers is the traditional lifestylers are almost like your OG consumers. They primarily consumed just flower or extracts. So the products that you can find both in legal markets, but that you predominantly only find in unregulated markets. The modern lifestylers were the Gen 2.0 consumers. These are people who both consume flower and extracts, but they also had a really high preponderance of consuming edibles and extracts and all of these other types of products that you only tend to find, or that you principally tend to find in legal markets. And one of the shifts we're seeing is, as the market is maturing, this transition of traditional lifestylers, a flower-only smoker, becoming a more kind of expansive type of portfolio consumer as they gain access to those products. And so that's a kind of just one example of archetypal shift that we're seeing. And one archetype that I really loved was a group that we found called the discrete unwinders. Almost all female, above the age of 45, almost all had kids above the age of 18. And they were stealth consumers. And as we're building this archetype, the mental image I had was a really frazzled woman sitting in her tub with the door closed, kids banging on the door, window open, smoking a joint in the tub, just asking for 5 minutes of sanity. Most of her friends don't know she smokes, even though she's been consuming cannabis since she was a teenager. She may have given it up for a period, but it's a part of her life now. It is still a part of her life. She's very, very discreet about it. She's the sort of person who would never consume in public, even if it was legal to do so. Most of her friends don't know she consumes, but she does say that cannabis is an important part of her lives. And so when we talk about kind of this transition, I think one of the things we're going to see is some of these discrete unwinders actually coming out of the closet, being more empowered, because, particularly because of products aimed at women that really kind of engage the use cases that resonate with women. And so, interesting to see that hidden within this broad kind of stereotypical cannabis consumer, you even have this type of profile of women middle-aged who are really passionate about cannabis, but still feel like they've got to be really, really restrained in how they talk about their cannabis use and how they express it. And so understanding these consumers, I think, enables products, brands, retailers to really understand how best to serve these consumers, because there's a beautifully rich diversity of them.
Just sort of to piggyback on the usefulness of archetypes, one of the consulting potential consulting clients we're talking to, it has a non-CBD brand of products that are currently on the market, and they want to launch a CBD version of this brand, and it's a pretty high price point product, and they want to spend about $100,000 or $150,000 on advertising to test whether the market likes this, whether people are going to be willing to buy this product. And so one of the things that we're discussing with them is developing archetypes so that they can very strategically target the kind of consumers that are most likely to buy it. Because if you just roll out these ads to everyone, there are a bunch of people, a bunch of kinds of people who are never going to buy this product. They're not going to be interested. So what we want to do is develop archetypes similar to what John was talking about, so that we can tell them where to focus their ad spend on this test to make sure that they're getting the best chance of success as possible.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't tell you how thrilled I am to see this development in the industry with the archetypes. I think that really the world is going to be wide open now. And I saw something in the comments about somebody saying that they felt like they're being spoken to or heard right now. And I think that that's really what this is about, right? Like the why you consume is so important, and who you are as an individual, not just I'm a rec user in California, right? Which is important, absolutely. But I think it does get more granular than that. And you can save a lot of money on your advertising and marketing by understanding that as well, product development, all that kind of stuff. To hear, did you, I'm looking at the time. Do you have, do we have more time for another question here?
Yes, well, I know we definitely want to get some time for some Q&A, but I did have one question that I wanted to ask you guys, especially because we have legalization on the horizon in a number of different ways potentially. We just saw where the MORE Act was potentially going to go in front of the House, which could potentially legalize cannabis on a national level. We also have where we have 5 states right now on the ballot to potentially legalize cannabis. How do you guys see that changing your projections? You know, how do you guys think that legalization impacts the cannabis industry overall? You know, and what are you guys' projections on, you know, where the market is going to go to should those take place?
I mean, on a state level, new states coming online, new states legalizing either medical or adult use has since the beginning been one of the biggest drivers of growth in the legal market. So as these states just continue to become legal either through voter initiatives or legislative action, we will see the market continue to grow as those states come online and mature. The federal legalization prospect will change everything. And that is a really big game changer. We will start to see many more companies from outside of the industry start to move in more rapidly. We'll see a lot more money that's available to companies in the space, and really the companies that have developed traction, that have built either acquired licenses, built a strong following, built strong sales pipelines. Those are the companies that are going to do well, either be acquired after legalization or be able to thrive. So certainly now is the time to get in. It's going to be much harder to compete if you're trying to get in after federal legalization.
And you're going to need a lot more money than you think you're going to need. So whatever you think you're going to need, you need to like double that. What we're going through right now, like I mentioned my background coming from tech, and I started working in mobile the year the iPhone came out. This reminds me a lot of my experience. Like nothing is like cannabis, but there are a lot of parallels in that people wanted to get in really early in mobile apps. So there was this flood of investment, and there wasn't a whole lot of KPIs that needed to be met because people were so excited about getting in. And then we started to see that, okay, some of the ROI wasn't necessarily there for the investors, and it was just so early that then the 2.0 tech came in, and then there started to be a difference in kind of what is required in companies to be successful, and having new talent come in. And so this where we're at right now in cannabis kind of reminds me of that 2.0 in the tech world. And so I think we don't even know what this is yet. And so it's just kind of, we're in our infancy. And so we're starting to figure it out. So yes, federal legalization is going to be a whole new game. But I think until then, it's really about understanding the different legalities and regulations within each state. Because, for example, Oregon is a state of 4.2 million people. They did $100 million in sales, and they have 700 open and licensed shops. California also has 700 open and licensed shops in the whole state of California with 40 million people. And so, you know, we did 350 million in sales last month. So understanding kind of each state's regulations and the availability of licensing is going to be really important, and understanding what your opportunity is within your state. And because every state is different regulations, like you really need to understand what's happening within them to be able to understand what the market's going to look like and how it's going to evolve over time.
Yep. Agreed. And also don't forget about ancillary businesses. Everybody doesn't have to be a cultivator or a retailer or a manufacturer. Everything that every other industry needs, cannabis needs as well. So don't forget about coming in on those levels. You just bring your expertise from the industry you were in to cannabis, and you learn as much as you can, as quick as you can.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I'll shift to some of the questions that we had in the audience. One question that was asked was, how does the development of hemp either help or hinder the progress of cannabis or marijuana?
So hemp is something that we spend a lot of time looking at, and we really look at hemp as three distinct markets and three distinct plants almost. So there's the phytocannabinoid rich hemp, so CBD and CBG and CBN, which is grown in a way that's similar to medical or adult use cannabis, where you're trying to optimize the flower production and the trichome production. And I think it's really interesting to see how that is being regulated. I don't think it poses a big threat to the medical and adult use market. I think that there's a great opportunity for it to be a supplement to on the medicine side for people for whom that is the right choice. And then there's the industrial hemp market, which ultimately is likely to be bigger than the medical and adult use cannabis market combined. And that's really just starting to take off. The Farm Bill passing in 2018 really opened up the door for that. And there's a lot of opportunity, and there are a lot of problems that need to be solved in the supply chain, and new technologies that need to be developed. But I don't tend to see any of those hemp markets as problematic or as threats to the high THC markets. I think they're really a different beast altogether.
I would echo that, and maybe a variant of that lens, which is part of what I think hemp legalization is doing, and as people are starting to understand the totality of the cannabis plant, I think it's helping soften attitudes toward cannabis writ large. And so as you start to see the scale of the potential that hemp represents, we literally did a webinar yesterday to some of the smartest people, I think, in the hemp ecosystem. And one of them said he thinks that the CBD component of hemp really only accounts for 2 to 5% of the total hemp opportunity. So if you think about all of the other biomass applications, the industrial applications, fibers, textiles, applied materials down the line, which we have barely scratched the surface of, I think the realization that hemp not only is an immensely versatile plant, but can be really valuable toward a whole host of issues, particularly related to human health, sustainability, and environmental protection. That momentum, I think, is only going to help both help people kind of connect with the cannabis plant in a different way. And I think serve as an initial step for people who may be completely divorced from cannabis to start thinking about, maybe there's something here I hadn't previously understood. And so this may be less of an issue in the US, but as we start talking about the emergence of a global cannabis economy, there's a lot of countries which are legalizing either medical cannabis or industrial hemp. When we started doing this, I think there were only 4 or 5 countries around the world where cannabis was either legal or about to become legal in any meaningful form. At this point, we're at over 70 countries that have deregulated or increased legal access to cannabis, whether that's hemp or medicinal. And given the type of conservatism we tend to see in many parts of the world, the broad spectrum applications of hemp, I think, are going to be a critical step to this awakening of, hang on, this isn't just about getting people high. There's potentially a lot of opportunity here that we hadn't considered. And that, I think, will even help challenge this optic of what getting high actually means, because it forces you to have a much more serious conversation about what the potential and capabilities of this plant are. So to David's point, I think this is going to be just additive. I don't think it's going to be detractive of the marijuana opportunity, if we're going to define the high THC market as that. I do think it is additive to a broader global conversation that's actually moving really, really quickly.
Absolutely. And another interesting question that we have in the Q&A section is, what newer states do you think present the most promising opportunities? So, as these new markets are coming on, where are some of the where you think are some of the lower hanging fruits or good opportunities that people should be looking at potentially going after?
I mean, Oklahoma has been shocking. Oklahoma, the rate at which that market has thrived has been really an interesting thing to watch. One of the key drivers as new markets come online for how well they'll perform and how quickly they will grow is what the regulations look like, right? So is it a medical market or is it an adult use market? If it's a medical market, is it a very restrictive market in which only cancer patients can get access, or only people with a small list of conditions, or is it a more permissible medical market where anyone who thinks it might be helpful can get access? And then on the licensing side, is it a limited license state? Are they only issuing 4 licenses to cultivate or to retail in the whole state, or are there a lot of licenses available? Is it unlimited? Can as many people as can win a license apply and get one? All of these things have a major impact on both how quickly the market will grow and what the prospects are like for individual businesses. So in some of these small states where the market might not ever have the potential of the bigger states and might not grow as quickly, there's still a lot of opportunity for the businesses that manage to get licenses if those licenses are limited. And we've seen that in several small states where a few companies essentially have a monopoly on the production. So really understanding those regulatory dynamics is one of the most important things to look at as new states come online.
I want to stress this point, like Arizona is going through Prop 207, or they're going to vote on that obviously this November. And Arizona currently has 130 licenses. They're going to give 26 equity licenses on top of the new licenses that they're issuing. So it is a more limited licensing state versus you look at Oregon, where I mentioned there's 700 open shops, but you look at the price of a pre-roll or price of flower in Oregon, it's very, very cheap. It's very hard to, be profitable there because of this open licensing. So you really have to understand your state's regulations and what that licensing looks like to be able to know if you're going to be able to be, or how successful you're going to be or not.
Just 2 quick thoughts there, echoing both what Jocelyn and David have said. There are more medical patients in Oklahoma that have registered with the program now than there are reported cannabis consumers in the government survey. I mean, the rate at which people have signed up for that program is completely insane, and you've never seen anything like it. But reflective of how, yes, you can model against other markets, but really understand what's happening in the local environment. And then second, Mike, to your question specifically about opportunities for upcoming markets, going to be paying really close attention to New Jersey. Very strategically located, so we expect not only is there going to be really strong demand within the state itself, but when we think about the proximity of New Jersey, easy driving distance from New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, the rest of the Mid-Atlantic markets, I think we're going, and coupled with the fact that that at least their current proposed tax rate is just going to be the regular sales tax for cannabis. So it's going to be arguably the lowest, it is going to be the lowest sales tax rate ever proposed for adult use cannabis. Means that I think you'll have this combination of comparatively really cheap cannabis, as well as cannabis accessible in a state that has a lot of regional opportunity, high population market, the most densely populated corridor of the US. So I think the regional cannatourism that we're going to see from the Mid-Atlantic, from some of the northern states into New Jersey will be unlike anything we've seen even across the Western markets. And I think the companies that get licenses in New Jersey are poised to do very, very well, assuming the rest of the regulations play out.
Yeah, and if I can jump in there on both points that John said, I think with New Jersey, I think it'll be the first domino to fall, right? So even if you can't get into New Jersey, look at the surrounding markets that are there. You have New York and, that whole East Coast. Once one domino falls, all the rest will. And as far as Oklahoma goes, I think that it gives us a taste of where the industry is headed, like the distinction between medical and recreational. Like, is Oklahoma really a medical market if you have 10% of population as patients, or is it just people who go pay $20 to buy cannabis? And I think you'll start to see that merging across the industry, and then we'll have to start defining things differently.
Awesome, thank you.
And as much as I wish we could go all day, I know that we have to finally wrap it at some point. But one question that I would love to get from you all in closing is just any advice that you might have for our social equity operators that are all part of NCIA's program. And then also as we look at this legalization and the market opportunities, just what role you think social equity has to play, like in this greater scheme of cannabis as things develop. And again, thank you all for all of your time and all the great information you shared. For everybody out there listening, please go to each of their websites. There's a ton of great information. If you are serious about trying to get in this industry, you absolutely need to look up Headset, ArcView, BDSA, New Frontier. This is the top of data in the industry. So I know we don't have much time yet, but if anybody wants to take one of those closing questions as we're headed out, it's on you.
So it can be tough to get into any new industry. It can be especially tough to get into the cannabis industry. There is a very steep learning curve. There are a lot of different regulations from one place to another, and the regulations tend to change a lot. In some states, there are really expensive application fees for getting licenses, and sometimes you need to do things like secure real estate for that license before you even apply. So it can be difficult. There are a lot of resources available. NCIA has a ton of resources for social equity applicants. I sit on the board of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. We have resources for social equity applicants, and we're rolling out more. At the ArcView group, we recently rolled out a mentorship program that focuses on social equity businesses, where we connect businesses with mentors who have a lot of experience in the space, and we really try to find mentors that meet the specific needs of those businesses. And so yeah, just it can be tough, especially if you don't have the same kinds of networks that some people have coming into this industry, if you don't have the same kind of access to capital. But definitely stick with it and reach out to these organizations that have programs that are there to help. We do need an extremely diverse cannabis industry, and unfortunately we're seeing a trend towards a wider industry. So part of that can be addressed by these social equity initiatives that are being passed in all sorts of states. But really the way to address that is by getting all of you to enter the industry and to thrive in the industry. So many of us are here to help support that, and yeah, thanks for coming, and thanks to NCIA for putting this on.
Yeah, I would say truly, I use every single one of these resources. The New Frontier, it is the first thing I read every morning, or as soon as that comes out. There's 5 great resources in that. Like, go subscribe to that. It's wonderful information. I listen to as many of the BDSA webinars because they do great webinars, great, easy to read reports. Same thing with Headset, ArcView. Every webinar, truly, I'm on all of their ArcView webinars. They have the best panelists, like industry leaders. My best advice, or the thing that I've learned in my 2.5 years, is get involved in the community. Go to your city council meetings. It is so important. It's the same handful of people generally that I see showing up at these meetings. And if you want some policy to change, if you want something to happen, you have to show up and build your network. That is the other thing. Like, just connect with people. Want to help each other in this industry. It's unlike anything I saw in tech or my past background. All you have to do is ask. So just build your network. Truly, your network is your biggest resource and your biggest asset, in my opinion.
Agreed. I echo both. I think just don't be timid. Don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to fail. Get up and start over, and just stick with it, like everybody else said. And like Jocelyn said, like all of these are great resources. Also, MJB is a great resource. Marijuana Business Daily. Their articles are amazing. They drop a lot of data in every article that they put out. So just stay abreast of it, read a lot, digest a lot, ask questions, and just keep going until you're successful.
I echo everything that has been said, and if we're using all of each other's resources, you should be as well. Maybe two just broader points about the outlook for this industry. For those of you who are just getting started in this space, plan for where the industry is going, not where it is today. So we know that there's going to be acute downward price pressure regardless of what market that you're in. We know it's going to become a much more competitive market regardless of where you sit. We know that capital access is going to become much more competitive over time. So plan for where the industry is going to be, not where it is today, and build those metrics, those protocols, those processes into your business now. Because as David said earlier, we know that broadly speaking, reform is coming, both at the state level and at the national level. And once that happens, the floodgates or this market dynamic is going to change dramatically. You don't want it to be at that point that you're trying to get your house in order. Do it today, get those established processes now. And it's going to make it much easier to be very, very competitive as the market continues to mature. And then second, we touched lightly on this earlier, but I think it is worth stressing. Think deeply about the effect that COVID is going to have in the way we as a society behave moving forward, and how that might impact the way you serve your customers in this market moving forward. So for example, if you have a lot of companies that are taking on work from home from policies and deeply establishing that, Washington, DC, 85% of businesses are not going to return to downtown Washington until at least mid next summer. What does that mean for what locations you choose and how you serve customers who are coming in? There's some really consequent, customers moving from 1 gram joints to 3rd gram joints. I mean, there's some really fundamental changes that I think are going to be longer lasting than just after us getting a vaccine, that I think are going to shape the way we interact and engage and consume cannabis. And I think for those of you who are getting started now, you have the luxury of thinking deeply about how to integrate those changes in the way you build your business moving forward.
Awesome.
Also,
yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
This was
Sorry about that. Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody. This was just an absolute pleasure to get to really learn from all you guys and all your great minds. And I've been following a lot of the newsletters and the news reports from all your companies for a while now. And I know firsthand that it's extremely useful and extremely helpful. And so hearing from you guys and how to use the data, I think is so important and key. Thank you so much for just sharing your time and your expertise and your wisdoms. Hopefully we'll keep this conversation going, because I think this is just really the tip of the iceberg. So thank you very much for joining us, everybody in the audience today. Thank you to Tahir for being Tahir and just really being such an advocate for everything in this industry and bringing the diversity and the equity and inclusion into this industry, putting together this awesome panel. So thank you so much, everybody, and have a great afternoon, great rest of your day. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Well, let's give a big virtual round of applause for this amazing panel today. Okay, well, thank you all for raising it. I'm not getting tired of these sound effects anytime soon. So thank you all. So I could not have said a better thank you and appreciation than Mike and Tahir did. But again, thank you so much, Maya, Jocelyn, David, John, and especially to Tahir and Mike for pioneering and leading this really great conversation today. I know that data analytics and access to data is definitely one of the most key benefits that NCIA members are always looking for. So I was really, really happy that all of you all could join us today to talk more about each of your all's platforms and resources. So as always, we're going to end today's session with a quick preview of some of NCIA's upcoming activities. So do stick around for the next few minutes while we give you a quick preview. In case all of you all didn't see, the next major activity that's going to be going on underneath NCIA's events calendar is our virtual reformat of our 7-year running annual conference and trade show, NCIA's Cannabis Business Summit and Expo. If you all have been following along, you'll all know that this was originally scheduled for June at the Moscone Center in San Francisco, then was moved to September. But however, we have finally had to make the really hard call over the last month to forego our in-person events and then reschedule that for 2021. However, you're not going to be left out in the dust this year, as we have reformatted this event into our Cannabis Business Summit and Cannabis Business Cyber Summit and Expo. And it's now going to be taking place over November 10th through the 12th. We're going to be putting all efforts internally towards this conference and trade show over the next few weeks. So you will see a little bit of a lag in our weekly Industry Essentials educational webinar program series, but do know that there is some amazing content upcoming that's going to be debuted. Over 35 tracks and sessions, I believe, are going to be hosted during this session, and we will have a virtual trade show component to the event as well. As it says here, all NCIA members do receive complimentary access to the virtual exhibit hall as well as all the sessions for 30 days following the broadcast date as well. And then registration at the moment is only going for $99 for non-members until October 16th. So everyone can register online at cannabisbusinesssummit.com. And if all that wasn't enough to convince you to join NCIA in order to gain complimentary access to this, we did just announce our keynote speaker, Andrew Yang, entrepreneur, best-selling author, and 2020 presidential candidate, will be joining us for on the main stage on the first day of the Cyber Summit. And he'll be sharing his thoughts on UBI, politics, and the future of work. So that'll be a really great conversation to engage in days after the election. And I'm sure Andrew Yang will have a lot of really great remarks to pass along. And then finally, just a quick note, as always, we are very interested in helping you spread the word about your business and gain exposure for your company in these times of lacking in-person events. We do have a wealth of digital marketing sponsorship opportunities that are being offered across all of our platforms, our weekly Industry Essentials webinars, our 2 podcasts, of which Tahir, as he just mentioned, is one of the hosts. That session on the Cannabis Industry Diversity Report that's going to be taking place later this month featuring CJ Wallace is going to be a really, really fantastic episode. And I believe that we're still searching for benefactors to support that session along with the entire Social Equity Scholarship Program itself. So if you are interested in putting money where your mouth is when it comes to supporting NCIA's DEI efforts, please do not hesitate to reach out to Tahir specifically, or as it says here, sponsorships at thecannabisindustry.org. And finally, a big and huge thank you once again to all of our panelists, our participants, and our sponsors of today's session. Simplify was the sponsor of today's session. So if you are interested in supporting any of our Catalyst Conversations monthly series or our weekly Industry Essentials educational webinars, please don't hesitate to reach out so you can learn more. And as always, we are going to leave you all with our member appreciation credit sequence. So stick around over the next 2 or 3 minutes for an alphabetical listing of all of our NCIA members that participated in today's session and the over 85 plus companies that have joined NCIA's network through our Social Equity Scholarship Program over the last few weeks. So we look forward to seeing you all next time. Again, a huge thank you to Tahir for organizing today's Catalyst Conversation series. Our next episode within this program will be taking place the first Tuesday of next month. So stay on the lookout for more details as Tahir develops that program out, and don't hesitate to reach out with your support. Thank you all so much. We look forward to seeing you all next time. And thank you for joining us for an NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar underneath our Catalyst Conversations program. We'll see you all next time. Thank you.